One thing that can really make or break our life is health. Health is obviously a really important thing. It's obviously a foundational component to who and what we are. Something which to a large degree influences and determines the results that we're able to create and manifest on the physical plane. As such, maybe it's important to look at what it is and what it actually means. Because we can't really trust the mainstream FDA definition of health because it's pretty terrible. It's pretty perverse and really has absolutely nothing to do with health. It's very immature, very mundane. And then we look at, okay, alternative health or holistic health or natural healing or whatever. And oftentimes they don't really define or even understand what health is either. So then we're sort of left with all these half definitions or half understandings. And how does that really help us? Well, most of the time it doesn't. So what we're going to do now is take a look about what health actually is, what it actually means, and honestly, probably the last definition or last explanation or imagery or analogy that we'll really need to understand it. And taking this definition, taking this understanding, this conceptual basis, or this imagery, and applying it to our lives can very likely produce profound results. Just imagine how powerful it can be to reimagine something in a better way, to re-image something in a way that is more useful, effective, and harmonious. Just that simple process alone can usually create more health, more energy, more vitality. So first we can look at a couple of different things. First, people want to talk about, oh, well, I'm healthy because I do X. I'm healthy because I go to the gym. I run. I do yoga. I'm healthy. I'm a vegetarian. I'm healthy. I take this vitamin or this supplement, so I'm healthy. I know what health is really all about. But then you ask people, and usually they're like, oh, I don't know. Never really defined it. Never really thought about it. Never really thought of ways to measure it and ways to track and keep up to date as to what's actually happening or if what I'm doing is actually working. So this idea that I do X so I'm Y doesn't really work, doesn't really make any difference. And obviously it's important. Obviously it's important to eat well and to exercise and do these sorts of things, but it is no guarantee of health. It is no necessarily correlate to health. Because I know people that really eat like crap, they don't really exercise, and they're healthy. They live a long time, and they don't really have any problems. There's people that I know who obsess over a diet and exercise and do it all perfectly, and they're just not healthy. There's other factors at play, like our constitution, like our Jing essence, like our mental, emotional health, our kind of non-physical health, and our level of stress, our level of tension and anxiety at an existential level. Because these things are sending different responses and different things to the body to influence what expresses and what doesn't. So let's get an example of this. Well, what does it mean? You would think if someone eats well, then that means they're healthy. Well, what's going to make all this make way more sense is when we talk about flow. Talk about what flow is and what it means. And we can talk about exercise. Most forms of exercise create more tension and anxiety and sort of contraction in the body or tightness. And just think about exercise. Think about how much people deal with tightness and contraction and sort of compression in the body. Like, oh, my muscles are real tight, I've been working out, or oh, I worked out super hard last night, so my muscles were all jacked up, so I had to go to bed early. It's like, well, that's just creating tension in the body over the long term. Meaning you're just taking tension and beating it into the body. And is tension health? Does tension have anything to do with health? Probably not. And same thing with diet. You can eat this, take that. Well, what's the absorption like? What's the assimilation like? What's the flow? What's the transformation and transportation of those nutrients? That's probably very important to look at. So we'll talk about, first we need to understand this concept of power circulation before we look at flow. So power circulation is a cool way of understanding really the sum total of fluid circulation in the body. Our circulatory system, nervous system, our synovial fluid, our cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid in our joints, the fluid in our spine, our digestive organs, the fluid in the tissue matrix that surrounds the organs that keeps them sort of juicy and soft. These are all fluids in the body. And really we can look at the sum total circulation of those things as power circulation, which all of these things are really important to move. And if we go back to the exercise example, people run, people go to the gym, people lift weights, do pull-ups, do push-ups. Okay, maybe you stimulate your heart rate a little bit. Maybe you're moving a little bit of muscles, but what's the range of motion? If you're running or walking, it's pretty much just like straightforward. If you're doing push-ups, it's pretty straight. What about moving your shoulder around through its full range of motion? What about up and over and back and around? And all these different articulations and ways in which the body can move as a unit usually isn't happening, which means circulation on all these other levels just isn't really happening. Which brings us back to our example in the very beginning where we talked about, well, maybe mainstream America doesn't really understand health. Maybe alternative people don't really understand health because a lot of times they miss all of these other levels of circulation in the body, all these other fluids that need to be moving in the body all the time. So now that we can see what power circulation is, it's the sum total of all these fluids circulating in the body and like our chi or our energy flow that's going in there as well. And if we're just going to the gym and just like panting and doing that whole thing, how is that really affecting our energy? How is it really affecting our chi flow? Probably not that well. Because think about this, whenever you're really relaxed, maybe you meditate, maybe you wake up in the morning, how do you breathe? Usually very calmly, very fluidly and smoothly. And that has a particular effect on energy flow. Well, what is it's like huffing and puffing and panting and doing that whole weird thing. You think that maybe influences energy and circulation in a certain way as well? Probably. So now that we understand power circulation, let's talk about flow and really why that is important and really what that's all about. Well, it's kind of like if we're eating food and that food isn't assimilated or digested or taken away or transformed or transported in a proper way, how useful is it really? If our joints are not really moving through their range of motion, then the consistency of the fluid in the joint, the synovial fluid, is going to be different. But when the joint really moves and moves in a certain way and through all of its articulations and ranges of motion in lots of different ways, it really smooths out the consistency of the flow, or not the flow, but the consistency of the fluid in that body, which all of our joints are basically energy gates or major places where energy goes through and sometimes is stored. Likewise, we can look at our organs. Our organs are really the things that are responsible for storing and creating energy. And if we're just walking like this, we're just doing push-ups and we're doing pull-ups, we're doing that whole thing, look at what's really the movement of the organs. What kind of massage and twist and push and pull and resistance is being put on the organs? Usually not very much, which means they're not getting massaged, they're not getting the stimulation of fluid exchange that they want, which means their ability to transform and transport is probably diminished as well. So, we might go to the gym and, we're putting in 60 minutes on the treadmill, we're doing push-ups and pull-ups and bench press and curls and this and that. and then we're eating this and taking the right supplements and protein powders and shakes and all these pills, but all the while our organs are just sitting there, not really getting the full range of motion that they want. Our joints aren't really getting the full range of motion that they want, and then thus our health is not really functioning at a high level because the power circulation isn't really happening, and because the fire isn't really being stoked. And remember earlier when I talked about, well, what is that simple imagery and simple definition to understand health? Well, it's the fire. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Because if we're talking about health, we obviously want to address mental, emotional, and spiritual, and tie back into this diet and exercise thing. Because people have definitions, I do this, so I'm healthy, I do that, so I'm healthy. And I know plenty of people who do these things, but mentally and emotionally or spiritually, they're stuck. Or they're just stuck in a place where they have a negative frame or negative behaviors and patterns and thoughts and beliefs. And all these things that basically constrain their energy and really keep their health at a lower level. Because just like in the same way, on a physical level, we need flow, we need movement. On the mental level, we need flow and movement. On the emotional, spiritual, all these levels operate on the same principles. So they all need flow and harmony in order to function in the way that they can and in the way that they were designed to function before our mind and all of our conditioning got in the way of the process. So getting to our simple illustration, talk about fire. Well, what is fire? What does it have to do with health? Well, fire is basically the utilization, transformation, and release of energy. Pretty simple. You put wood in a fire, fire catches on the wood, turns the wood into heat and light, and then eventually into ash and smoke. So the energy is being utilized, transformed, and released. Well, what happens in the body? Take in food, breathe in air, meditate, we relax. Energy is doing the same thing. And we can look at health as basically being that process. Health being the process of energy being used, transformed, and released. And how efficient and effective that process is really determines how healthy we are. And that process can be efficient and effective only when the power circulation is happening and only when the flow is really there. So to take a little bit deeper, how do you make a fire? How do you build a fire? Well, obviously getting the fire is a couple different steps. You got to have a container for it. You got to have a place for it. Well, luckily we already have a body. Boom, easy. Well, you got to have fuel. You got to have, some things that will come together and spark and create energy or create energy being transformed. Well, we can already eat food. We can already exercise. We can already breathe. We can already meditate. We can already sleep. We can already, have positive relationships and have sex and be creative and do all these things. So that's really already there. When it becomes tricky is when maybe we haven't really taken care of the fire. Maybe we haven't really tended to it. Or maybe we tended to it improperly or gave it things that it really didn't want, put in things that didn't really burn well. Or maybe we threw a bunch of twigs and a bunch of little leaves and newspaper on the fire and just burned up really quick, and all of a sudden the fire just dies down. So we need to ask, well, how do we put logs on there? How do we put really thick things on that fire that will burn for a long time and produce a lot of energy and be really efficient in that process? And then while that fire is going, how can we come along every so often and just stoke the fire, move the fire around, add a little bit if we need to, and just keep it burning at a high rate? And really that's where the flow comes in and the circulation comes in, because fire needs what? It needs air, it needs movement, it needs room to breathe, it needs to move around. Fire is not fixed, fire is not stagnant, it's always moving around and doing things. Environment's changing, things are changing, it's responding. Our health and our body are really much in the same way. So we can look at that and understand fire in that really deep way. So how this all ties together is basically this. Health is really the process of keeping the fire going by keeping the flow going of the power circulation through our diet, our exercise, our meditation program, our sleeping patterns, our supplements, our mental emotional patterns and programs and meditation, and all these different things are really have the purpose to stoke the fire, to keep the circulation moving, to keep the flow happening. Because when things are flowing and moving, we feel better. When they're not, we feel worse. A simple example of this is, let's say it's Christmas or Thanksgiving or some special occasion, you eat a big meal and all of a sudden what happens? You're basically down for the count, or you feel like crap, you feel heavy, you feel lethargic, you get indigestion, you get gas. Why? Because there's a bunch of crap sitting in the stomach that is not moving. It's just overwhelmed the system, and the system's just like, oh, I don't know what to do. There's no movement there. But you eat maybe a meal that's more appropriate for your metabolism, and then boom, you take the meal and then you feel better. You want to go do things. Why? Because the movement's happening, because the flow is happening. Same way you can tourniquet any part of your body and the flow and the movement is going to be diminished, then the health of that thing is going to be diminished as well. People sometimes get really tight neck and back and shoulders because they do this all the time. They're so uptight and tense. Well, what happens? They get headaches, they get lightheaded, they can't focus, they can't concentrate, they can't do this, they can't do that. Why? Well, there's a lot of flow not really happening in this area of the body. Likewise, people get tight in their hips, people get tight in their low back, in their abdomen. What's going to happen? Constraint on the organs. Why is that important? Well, all of our organs are surrounded by tissues. Those tissues want to be loose. They want to be relaxed. Why? So they can flow. Because when our organs get constrained through muscular tension or improper breathing, they don't function as well. They don't do their job as well. Thus, their ability to produce and store energy goes down. We mentally register that as, I just don't feel good. I don't feel as good anymore. Well, why? Fire is not really being able to burn. It's not really being stoked. It's not really given what it needs to produce the things that it needs. Likewise, the flow isn't happening, the power circulation happening through some aspect of lifestyle, physical or non-physical or whatever. So really, I think that's the most simple and easy way to understand health, in a way that cuts through all of the crap, cuts through all of the propaganda that's put out there by the mainstream world and the alternative world. And this definition really empowers us, me and you, the individuals, to operate from more harmonious paradigms, from more harmonious mental states, to be able to be more clear with our thought processes and make decisions based on what's real, not what's based on just some weird conditioning process. Because health doesn't have to be complex, because it is natural. It is our birthright. It is our inheritance because we exist. So really, it's as simple as just getting rid of the things that are blocking the flow in the first place. We're getting rid of the things that are really putting out the fire, not really allowing the fire to burn and take place in the way that it needs to.